Greetings, friends and lovers. So, 2017 was a better year for gaming than it was for most things in the world. For the first 6 months, it was just amazing game after amazing game released right on top of each other. Then it sorta turned into the year of the loot box, but even that couldn't kill my enthusiasm for these 10 games, which are factually the best things to happen this shitty year. And to start, we have the Switch. Just in general. It was a hell of a year for Nintendo. The Switch came out and just shattered sales expectations. But more than that, Nintendo actually had a really solid release plan for the first year with at least one big-name Nintendo game coming out every month. Zelda, ARMS, Splatoon, some Mario, Xenoblade 2, and that's not even going into the solid port jobs of AAA games or the indies available on the market. So rather than clog my list with wanking off Nintendo, I'm grouping it all together here. If you feel like that is cheating, well then I've got news for you. I haven't even played Yakuza 0, but I'm still putting it on my list. I've been a fan of the Yakuza games for a few years now, and that ain't easy to do. The games get almost no attention in the West and are hard to find on the used market. And once you get one, you find it's basically a JRPG with a turn-based combat replaced with a brawler where you can powderize a man's face with a bicycle and then concuss his friend with one of the tires, taking place in a very small free-roam city where you can't cold cock passers-by and side quests aren't even marked on the map. So what was it about Yakuza 0 that got it enough notice to be worth a fucking Angry Joe review? Well, maybe it was cutting down the frankly excessive 5 protagonists of Yakuza 5 down to just series protag Kazuma Kiryu and fan favorite Psycho Goro Majima. Maybe it was setting the game in the decadent 80s of Japan and leaning even harder into the series' trademark silliness. Well, whatever it was, Yakuza 0 takes the number 9 spot entirely because of my gratitude that finally this game series got some mainstream attention. More mainstream attention than the latest entry in the long-neglected Star Fox franchise, anyway. Star Fox 2 was finished all the way back in 1996, but was only released this year, which means it totally counts for a 2017 year-end list. I don't want to hear any whining, especially from you, David. I've never considered myself a fan of the Star Fox games, so I was shocked when my Earthbound Zelda and Metroid box also happened to have one of the most absorbing strategy titles I've played in a long time. The usual primitive on-rail shooter with even more primitive 3D graphics now feeds into a surprisingly tense real-time strategy system on the galaxy map. You've got to intercept fighters, missiles, and planet-busting carriers while Andross throws boss monsters at you, and also meet the Starwolf Squadron. Time doesn't stop in these little battle instances, so you have a strong incentive to finish the fights before that missile you ignored slams into Corneria. I really do wonder what the Star Fox franchise would have been like had this game actually released when it was made, as it is so different from almost everything else in the franchise. It's not perfect, the space combat is still simplistic, and the frame rate holds at a number consistently lower than my age. They definitely pushed the early 3D about as far as they could, but it was something new and very replayable, putting it in stark contrast to Resident Evil 7, a game that liberally steals from other horror properties and is worth playing maybe twice. Don't get me wrong, I actually admire Capcom's willingness to completely throw out the established gameplay when it stops working. This is the second time they've done that. And taking cues from Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a healthy dose of Amnesia: The Dark Descent was a much better idea than Chris Redfield punching more boulders. Added to the Amnesia formula is now you have a gun to defend yourself from the crazy hillbillies with pitchforks as you try to save your wife. It's pretty incredible how much scarier the usual Resident Evil invincible mutator is when it looks like Uncle Billy, but only after he ripped off someone's hand and ate it. Solving a puzzle while Foghorn Eatsmore is chasing you around is really tense, and there's a wonderful sequence where you escape a jigsaw trap using knowledge you gained from a playable VHS sequence. Biohazard noticeably weakens once you're past the Leatherface family and it turns to killing boring sludge monsters that are so slow you have enough time to run past them and admiringly gaze at their booty before they become a threat. It gets on the list for being one of the most genuinely effective horror games I've played in a while, even if the ending was pretty disappointing, a problem it shares with the next game on this list, Absolver. And when I say that Absolver has a disappointing ending, that's a pretty impressive feat considering the game has like 5 cutscenes and no story to speak of. But who needs a story when you have the most sublime kung fu combat engine since God Hand? Absolver is best described as a very small Dark Souls game with the build-your-own-combos engine of God Hand, which I am shocked more games haven't stolen from since it's brilliant. And when I say it's like Dark Souls, I mean that in the ways that matter. You explore a starkly beautiful world while getting into punch-ups and bumping into other human players. But like I said, it's a good bit smaller than a FromSoft game, and the ending is more akin to an MMO like Destiny, where the game goes, "Righto, you beat all our scripted challenges. I guess go grind for the multiplayer now? And if you're worried about that multiplayer focus, I can attest that this was one of the nicest online communities since there's basically no benefit to harassing lower level players and there's no way to communicate outside some gestures. But the meaty center of all of this is the build your own combos kung fu. You start out with one combo chain and a few moves, but after learning the moves by absorbing them with your face for a few hours, you'll be chaining sweeping kicks with drunken jabs like a pro. The force stance system is a sublime way of switching between combos, and if this game had more stable netcode and a better tutorial, it would be a lot higher on my list. Even then, Absolver was one of the nicest surprises in gaming this year, almost as surprising as Supergiant Games making what is essentially a visual novel crossed with NBA Jam. Pyre almost feels like a game made on a dare, like when Dr. Seuss wrote Green Eggs and Ham because someone bet him he couldn't write a book using only 50 words. Let's create an entire fantasy world, but only show the player the magical prison where we throw criminals, and then have them fight their way back to the surface through a magical sports tournament guided by the literal star gods. Oh, and let's not have the story stop even if they lose the sports tournament. It just keeps going, meaning we have to track the location of upwards of 18 characters when we reach forced story end. And I guess we'll invent a totally original combat system while we're at lunch or something. Alright everyone, good meeting, let's get cooking. The large sports team you pal around with means that Supergiant's usual narration gimmick has to be scaled back, but that means more focus on character interplay, and the writing is still excellent. The magical basketball game maybe isn't as complicated as it looks, but with 9 character classes and plenty of incentive to swap in bench warmers after you rapture one of your best players, it's still got a lot of tactical depth. It's almost frustrating how solidly designed this game is, with my only 2 complaints feeling really silly in comparison to the game's overall quality. One, I could never figure out how to tell who I would be passing the quaffle to, which made passing strategy something I just had to leave behind. Not that it mattered, since I only lost 1 match in my entire playthrough, but that leads me into my second complaint. I saved all the characters I wanted to save in my first playthrough, and therefore have no desire to play it again. I had a similar problem with Papers, Please, where even though there are clearly a bunch of different endings to get, I can't imagine ever playing it again and messing up the great ending I did get. Which may just be my problem, but I still feel like I'm leaving a lot of content on the plate. Whatever. It's still one of the most tightly designed stories I've ever played, but in a way that does leave me a bit cold. I kinda prefer a game like Gravity Rush 2, a game that I'm fairly certain lost its Adderall prescription last week. You start off not having gravity powers because your magic cat wandered off, but then it walks in from literally off frame and it's back to dive-kicking monsters. Then you're working to free a city from a fascist dictatorship, then you get sucked through a portal to the city from the first game, which is under a completely different fascist dictatorship, and your friend is now evil, except it was just a mind control mask, and now you're fighting a superhero idol, and God is kinda just hanging around. And to be fair, that level of plot madness was present in the first game, and the story issues don't extend to the characters, who are all fun and well realized. The combat's been improved, with the throwing of physics objects not being a horrifying nightmare anymore, but the game still hasn't found a way to make the myriad of combat challenges interesting, just less tedious. But now that it's free of the hardware limitations of the Vita, Gravity Rush can finally deliver on the gorgeous, massive open world to plummet around. This world is so colorful and full of breathtaking vistas that I still hop in to just look at. And the gravity mechanic is perfect for crawling all over every inch of it. It's also one of the most populated open worlds I've ever traveled, full to the brim with weirdly dressed NPCs, which folds into how much of the side quests are about helping these people. I've never been more happy to take a walk through a market square in a game where I can literally fly. And I especially liked the new lightweight lunar form that makes your jumps gigantic and finally makes sticking to walls worth your time. And like any good superhero sandbox, the city is just littered with XP gems for you to pick up, begging you to climb every building and see every sight. In a year where 3D platformers saw such a resurgence, it's a shame this game was so quickly forgotten. Still, it'd be hard for a platformer to not get overshadowed in a year where Super Mario Odyssey came out and so casually conquered the world. Yeah, I know I said I was grouping the Switch games, but that doesn't include this actual masterpiece of extra-dimensional navigation. Super Mario Odyssey was everything I wanted it to be and more. I've been hankering for a toy box style 3D Mario since Sunshine was the last of that type, and hoo boy did Odyssey deliver on that special style platforming playground where the prescribed route is at most a suggestion. Yeah, I could go through the pipe, but... And that's before I go into the game-changing hat mechanics that not only open up all kinds of amazing jump combos, but vastly increase the gameplay variety through the wonderful power of mind control. But honestly, the most amazing thing about this game is just how wonderfully imaginative it is. The kingdoms may vaguely match the usual Ice World, Fire World, Forest World themes, but all with unique twists on the formula and filled with a whole world of new Mario characters. Seriously, with one for each kingdom, the scope of the Mario world has practically tripled. I will pitch a fit if these characters get Geno'd, especially the seals and the adorable snuggly sweaters. Super Mario Odyssey is a pure joy factory that I almost never stop smiling at. It's the kind of game that other game developers must look at and wonder how Nintendo makes this shit look so effortless. There's not a single game that came out this year that was more fun than Super Mario Odyssey. But then, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice isn't really trying to be fun. I already made a whole video about this game, and my feelings have not changed. Hellblade is a harrowing experience, and one that I can only recommend if you have a strong stomach for pain. Senua's quest through either Viking hell or her own tortured mind is gripping in a way that fun just doesn't really cover. It's not exactly fun to have the voices in Senua's head whispering at you, cutting you down, and making you question your actions as a player. It's not exactly fun to confront the greatest traumas in Senua's life as she seeks desperately for any reason to go on living. And it's not exactly fun fighting upwards of 10 Viking zombies while the camera is zoomed in on your back and the only indication you have that someone is approaching from off camera is one of those damn voices shouting at you. But Hellblade accomplishes something that few games do. It got me to think about things outside of games. Most of the really good video game stories of late are on some level a meta-commentary on gaming. Hellblade is about trauma, grief, and psychosis. It inspired me to learn about psychosis, and inspiring me is something I wish more games would do in life. I loved it to death, and I can't wait to see what Ninja Theory does next, just like I'm sure you can't wait to see what my favorite game of the year was. Well, you'd probably know what it was if you followed me on Twitter. I mean, come on, people, I often spoil my next videos on there. You should follow me, and I'm definitely not begging— Shut up, David! The best game of the year is Nier Automata. And I'm not really being facetious when I say it's the best game of the year. I cannot think of a single game that came out this year that was a more perfect fusion of gameplay and story. Maybe Horizon Zero Dawn, but I found that to be pretty conventional outside of the robot dino hunts. Nier Automata once again builds on Yoko Taro's favorite pastime of examining video game violence, this time by having human-built androids in a war with alien-built wind-up toys. But both humans and aliens are long dead, so at this point the two sides fight for faith, I guess. It's basically a religious war now. For a game that is pretty blatant about its love of Android butt, this game goes into a lot of interesting story directions, like how adorable, beloved Sweet Roll 9S maybe has some issues when it comes to 2B. Or how all these robots dedicating themselves to perfecting their skills almost invariably blow themselves up after failing. Or Pascal, the head of the peaceful robot village, or the amusement park run by robots, or the baby robot king, or the robots trying to fuck cause humans did it, why can't we? This game's story is bizarre in all the amazing ways, but to go into more detail would definitely spoil. Just trust me when I say all this crazy is building to some themes that will knock your socks off and light them on fire. On top of the delightful Yoko Taro story weirdness, he finally got his gameplay to not suck by subcontracting to Platinum Games, my favorite game developer and kings of high-speed, flashy action. It's a bit looser and floatier than Bayonetta, and the RPG elements can pretty decisively snap the challenge in half if you upgrade right, especially with the auto-heal and lifesteal options just sitting there asking why you haven't installed them yet. It's actually pretty well balanced for either flavor of player, with plenty of micromanagement upgrading if that's your thing, and disgustingly hard enemies if you crank the difficulty past normal for all the DMC masochists out there. Even the side quests mostly manage to escape the grind for some items trap that most of the original Nier fell into. Am I selling you on this game where fetish maid robots slice up the sexless Bishi twins? I'm not sure how I can explain anymore how this existentialist screed on the meaningless futility of existence is one of the greatest games ever made, not just of this year. Which again, let me remind you, was the kind of year that would make you question the value of humans existing. So you might as well get all your unween done while staring at some sweet assets. Yeah, that's a nice classy way to end this video. Cut it and print it, people!